Time is now 6:31. I will call this meeting to order. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mayor Lofgren.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ott. Trustee Counterman.
Here.
Trustee Doherty. Trustee Jeffrey.
Here.
Trustee Morris.
Here.
Trustee Strock.
Present.
Next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved, and make sure you have your mics on, everyone. Next item is audience business. Do we have any speaker slips tonight? No audience business tonight. Next item is the consent agenda. For the benefit of the audience, the items on tonight's consent agenda are the payment approval report in the amount of $458,748.24 and the October 22nd, 2019 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second. Motion and second. Roll call, please.
Trustee Jeffrey.
Yes.
Trustee Strock.
Yes.
Trustee Ott. Mayor Lofgren.
Yes.
Trustee Morris.
Aye.
Trustee Doherty.
Yes.
Trustee Counterman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Carry 7-0. Next item on the agenda is the financial update. Mr. Green.
All right, hi, everybody.
Hello.
Well, it's getting further and further into the year here. We're, what is it, 83% done. So, looks like the revenue of the general fund is about 107% of budgets. We've got all the property taxes collected there. More importantly, the expenditures are about 46%, so there shouldn't be any issues there as well, too. There's no doubt that we'll budget under that fund. Nothing really unusual going on in there during the year that needs to be brought to your, during the month that needs to be brought to your attention. As well, the water and sewer fund, or both, water fund is about 52% of budget, and the sewer fund is about 62% of budget. So everything is tracking kind of like I've been telling you throughout the year. No surprises in here that you need to be aware of. Yeah, everything should be in good shape. So some of the projects will carry over to next year, but that's already been factored into the budget. So, any questions?
Are there comments from the board? Trustee Strock?
I've got, the way you redid the format, it's a lot easier to read. It's kind of back the way it was.
Yeah.
So I certainly appreciate that. And then on page 1 where we have the cash allocation for that, I guess you have that page.
I do.
Okay, so for the water fund and the sewer fund, the allocation, one's 9.8 million and the other's 5.2. Are those unrestricted funds?
So they do, for the most part, yes, they can be used for a variety of different things. Most of it is there for like plant expansion, growing type of things. A lot of that's been built up through PIFs. So although they come in with a designated purpose as far as what the code says and all that other stuff, you could really use them for most of what you would want to be using them for in that fund.
So like a savings account to spend on things that come up for the most part?
Yeah, and certainly any kind of capital outlay would really fit what those PIFs were all about anyway, so they'd fall right into that nicely.
Exactly.
Everything else that would come up, as you kind of mentioned, when you say that, I think more of like day-to-day operations, right? Line breaks, something like that we deal with those. Those are pretty much built in and financed with the everyday fees. So that's really available. Let's just call it available for capital projects, because ideally we would want the day-to-day operations to finance themselves and then to set aside for the money. So yeah, a savings account available for capital.
Okay, so I guess what I'm kind of getting at is when I look at the water fund and the sewer fund, so the water fund, we're about, 2 million over in revenues over the expenditures, and the water fund's 1.8 million. That's page 15 and 20, I believe. But anyway, so at the end of the year, as those funds accumulate, they will go into this allocated unrestricted funds. And I guess what I'm getting at is I'm looking for a way to come up with maybe, $3.5 million, this year that we could maybe put forward to some of our water projects in the future.
This year you mean
Pardon?
by this year you mean 19?
Yeah.
$3.5 million to put towards your water projects.
Well, for projects in the future. Example would be like Lake Henry or a water tower.
I mean, so essentially, that's got to come from somewhere, right? So
Sure.
essentially, you have, essentially so far you've put away 1.8 million during the year for that purpose. Now, the origin of that is when I come back to those PIFs, right?
Right.
I saw that there was, sorry, I've got it somewhere. There's 1.1 worth of PIFs that were collected. So out of that 1.8 that you've brought in and saved, 1.1 were from PIFs,
Okay.
which, kind of like I touched on earlier, the PIFs really shouldn't be used to fund operations. They should be fund Lake Henry,
Expansion, right.
all that other stuff. So you put away those 1.1 in PIFs plus an extra 700,000. The way I see that, especially with the little time we have left in the year, I would say that fund is doing well for itself based on the sources of funds that you're bringing in, and then how you chose to use them, and when you haven't used them, you're saving them for next year. And that's the water fund. I could do the same analysis on the sewer real quick.
Sure. How much of that would be PIFs?
Well, so that's going to be really skewed here.
Okay.
The reason I say this, you got net revenue over expenditures of 2 million. Of that was 3.2 from the BB draw.
Yeah, that was my other question.
You brought in, you only have about 340,000 worth of PIFs from there. And I expect to see some revenue still come in a little bit from Brighton. So right off the back of the napkin here, that tells me that you spent about 1.2 without the BB draw, but you guys had some projects going on out there that was going to as well. So it's not like it was funding salaries. It's being used for what it was intended to be used for.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Anyone else? Thank you for your update. Next item on the agenda is the action items. The first is appointment to the Planning Commission, and I don't believe our applicant is here. Is that correct? So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is action item B, the water revenue bond information. Mr. Matlos.
Good evening. Good to see everybody again. Alan Matlos, now with Stifel Nicholas. George K. Baum got acquired 7 weeks ago. So same phone number, but different business card. Hard to be an independent, family-owned business anymore in this regulation. So now with a bigger firm doing the same thing. So just to let you know. And I'm here to talk about how water projects can be financed. And I think Trustee Strzok was hitting on it exactly in his questions earlier. And so I just wanted to run a couple things by the board and then see if this would lead to further discussion about what options are. So it's always a balance between cash and borrowing. And you borrow if you have to, but you don't have to borrow if you don't need to. The first place to get your money is from somebody else. So if somebody walked in with a pile of cash, I would take that first, and then use your own cash, and then borrow. The challenge is that the town has been growing at such a rapid rate that if you took the last couple years of financial activity in the water fund, for example, and you drew a straight line, well, then you'll have so much money you wouldn't know what to do with it. But you know, the world does not work in a straight line. So I think the question is, you know, how do you plan for disruptions in economic activity? What if there's a slowdown? What if there's a new requirement from some, you know, environmental rule and you have to build something or add a process? So kind of my analysis on this is kind of like, okay, let's look at what your capital needs are. Talk about Lake Henry, talk about the tank. And as I understand it in my discussions with Steve, Lake Henry's $3.5 million-ish, and the water tank tower could be $6 million. And if you did those two, then you would use up all your cash. So that's probably not a good plan. And you want to have enough cash around so that if there is something that changes, an emergency, a new regulation, you don't have to raise rates, right? Let's say you have a combination of bad scenarios where new expenses came in and development slowed down at the same time. That's a tricky situation. So one of the things to think about is how much cash should you keep and how much should you spend? And then what's left to be paid for as a capital expenditure, and do you need to borrow money for that? Okay, so this is very high tech. You want to write this down. I kind of split it down the middle. I said, you pay for half the stuff with cash and you borrow for half the stuff. And then you have flexibility just in case you need the money, because this money's been acquired recently, but it takes a long time to get that money back if you use it all. If you need to borrow money, the rating agencies and the investors like to see that you have a bunch of cash because that makes them feel better. So that's another reason to keep some of that cash. The town does have outstanding water revenue bonds. For those of you that were around in 2012, I helped get those refinanced. There's an opportunity to refinance those again if that's something that is done in coordination perhaps with a new project. It'd save a few dollars. So you've done this before. Those bonds have a nice high A rating on them, so the town is in good shape there. Interest rates are very low, so if you were to borrow money, you could borrow at pretty low interest rates today, which is nice. But I think it's all about balance. It's all about balancing your needs and trying to figure out the best way to do that. We don't expect anything to change significantly in the next few months. It's always a little bit of a question mark in a presidential election year. In case you've heard, there's a presidential election coming up in 2020. I've heard nothing about this, but apparently there's an election coming up. And so that gets a little bit wacky sometimes, especially, I think, as candidates may become more front runners and some of their policies may be viewed as potential. And then what does that mean, right, to the world? But I think the good news is that the town's in good shape financially. The town does have significant capital needs. Water is what we've been talking about. If those capital needs are soon, which it sounds like they're kind of soon, based on the growth you've had, there's a chance you need to borrow some money. And you can borrow it and you can pay it off early, you know, rates are low, you can keep the payments low, so it gives you flexibility, that kind of thing. But I think generally there's opportunities for that. So I think it's something to think about, and I'd be happy to continue this discussion as this moves forward and give the town some ideas about what financing plans could look like. As was mentioned earlier, some of those revenues, though they're in the fund, you may have limitations. So you want to divide them up into categories and use the right money for the right thing. So I think that's all I'm going to say there, and I'd be happy to answer questions about how those would work. But real quick, just for everybody's remember, water revenue bonds can be issued without an election, right? These are an exception from Tabor because they're an enterprise, right? There's no taxes involved in the fund. So that's how most water projects are funded, by user fees, right? So they don't touch the general fund, they don't touch taxes, they just are paid for by the water users. And as the number of the population in the town increases and the number of water customers increases, that fund becomes more and more stable, because now you have all this one-time revenue, which is great, but start depending upon it, that's when something changes. So I'll stop talking there.
You said we could refinance the bonds we refinanced in 2012. Would that be basically combining the existing bonds with the new bonds and just making one giant bond?
Right.
Okay.
Right. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to refinance those bonds by themselves because you have legal costs, that are kind of the same. But when you put it in with if you were doing what you call a new money project, you could save a few dollars. I did it, kind of back in an envelope, somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 it would save, which is great. But if you did it by itself, you would pay, $60,000 or something to get all the stuff done. So it doesn't really help as much. But if you're doing a project anyway, something to think about. The other thing is, when we did those bonds in 2012, the town was in a different financial position. It had, I don't know, half the population, maybe 60% of the population it has today. And we want to look at the requirements in that bond issue to see if they are something that isn't as good as we could get today, and you might pay that off just to eliminate any of those requirements. So,
Any other questions from the board? Trustee Morris?
I'd like to ask for a couple points of information.
sure.
About the 2012 revenue bonds. What was the bond amount for? Do you recall, do you know off the top of your head?
It was a little over
the
2
rate
million.
in terms of it?
A little over 2 million. And now there's 1,510,000 remaining.
For how long of a term? Was it
It was to
financed for?
2029, I believe. So if just for some history, in 2012, we refinanced two bond issues that the town had outstanding. One was a general obligation bond and one was a water revenue bond. The financial position in the town was much different back then, and we were working really hard to kind of get all these things lined up and straightened out. So it was kind of a lot of work for, I don't know, a year or something to get those put in place, to get those funds in good shape. So you could also, pay it off. You could use some of the cash to pay off the bonds. That's another alternative. I mean, then it's less cash for projects, so you got to figure out what's the right use of the money.
Trustee Stratt?
So in this balancing act, I'm kind of seeing that we need to balance the cash
Correct.
with our rates, and then we need to borrow. Because if we borrow it all and don't change our rates, we're just taking the money out of someone's pocket over here instead of over here. It seems like it's going to cost people the same, whether it comes out of just raising all the rates or having a mill levy to them or something like that. So to me, it seems like we could split it up, maybe increase our rates a little bit, without shocking the masses. And then, I'd like to reserve a lot of our cash or save as much of it as possible. And, the splitting it right down the middle kind of scared me right at first, but if we could accomplish that with say, that half with some of our cash and maybe what we would raise our rates, it'd be a little more palatable. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Absolutely. I'm always sensitive to the fact that I'm a debt peddler by profession. And so I try to, not promote borrowing too much money, but just say that you have options, right? And you can look at what makes the best sense. Typically what happens is you go through this process and then you look at it and an answer kind of makes the most sense. And you look at it and you say, that's kind of makes sense. And it could be, the reason I took that project because the water tower was about $6 million and that was essentially maybe about half. That's the only reason. But it doesn't have to be that way. It could be less, it could be more, it could be longer, it could be shorter, it could, whatever you want to do.
Certainly, but I think you have to balance it between different things. And
Right.
the other thing too, are we counting part of this as the sewer, coming out of the sewer fund?
No.
And so I might ask why we're not. Lake Henry, and maybe I'm wrong, was originally intended to just catch what came out of the lagoons, just whatever came out of our sewer system. So it seems like it should be responsible for some of the cost also.
So that
We're returning it back to what it was.
right, that's a good point. So one of the things to think about in this process is whether the water and sewer funds are separated or combined in terms of the revenue and in terms of the pledge if you do borrow money. So if you combine them, then you have more revenue, right? So it would be easier to borrow more money. But you want to be thoughtful that the minute you combine them is then the next day you'll have a big sewer project, and then the money was pledged towards another project and you can't use it again for something else. So you got to think ahead to that next project to make sure that you have the most flexibility for the town if something happens. Like, I don't know, engineering wise, like where you are in treatment when the next treatment.
Yeah, hypothetically, if that would be the next thing that would come up.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, we put all the money here,
Yeah.
it's not available. So you just got to be thinking about that.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely. But that's a discussion we always have about whether you combine or separate.
Perfect, thank you.
Anyone else? So if we were to, say we decided to do a $10 million bond, what kind of payoff date would we be looking at, and what kind of yearly payment would we be looking at?
So,
Ballpark.
rule of thumb, if you're out, say, 25 years, because it's just an easy number, rule of thumb is for every million that you borrow, the payment is about $65,000 a year for principal and interest at today's interest rates. So for 10 million, it'd be $650,000 a year-ish. And you can borrow for as short as you want, and after, you could go, 30 years, 35 if you wanted to, but after that, it's diminishing benefit because the payment doesn't go down very much for how much longer you go, and then you pay a lot more interest. Just like your home mortgage decision, do I do a 30-year home mortgage or a shorter home mortgage? What's your call? That kind of thing. So that's just to think about. But the other thing that comes into play today is that interest rates are low. That's fine, but they're also flat. So there's essentially no difference in interest rates between 20 years and 30 years. So some local governments, not all, some local governments are saying, I'll borrow a little bit longer. There's no penalty in interest rate. I will keep that payment low just in case something comes up. I can always pay it off early, but I want to keep that payment low just for unexpected. So again, we can run those scenarios and you can look at them and see what makes the most sense.
Questions? Well, then I will,
One more.
yep, go ahead.
Is your commission based on the number of years?
No, it is
Okay,
not.
all
It is
right.
based on the amount. That's why I was sensitive to the amount. It's a percentage of how much you borrow.
All right, thank
So
you.
no, the years don't. That was good though. I like that. The total read, that would have been good. No, just the amount you borrow. But I
Trustee
look
Moore?
forward to any way I can help the town.
Trustee Morris?
Yeah, as far as the terms of repayment of the bond, in addition to what's calculated in your scenario, 65 or 650,000 or whatever it ends up to being, how is it determined? I guess the question would be more for the municipality side is how and where are those funds allocated from and stuff. So that's probably not under your umbrella for that.
But you have limits. So for example, if you want to borrow money and you don't want to have an election and want to use the enterprise exemption in Tabor, it has to be money from an enterprise. So the only enterprises I'm aware of that the town has are water and sewer. So that's the pledged revenue. And you could either pick water or sewer or some combination, but that's your choice. And then the repayment can be level payments, they can be extending, decline, doesn't matter. I mean, you can figure out what that is. Sometimes people know there's a big project, so they'll have a space in the payments where they go down in a couple years to allow for cash funding of a project. We can figure that out. It's just math at that point in time in terms of what makes the most sense for the town.
Thanks. Thank you.
So I guess Mr. Matlos and staff are probably looking for direction from us as to whether we want him to continue to investigate options. I think at least if I'm judging by board's reaction, we're cool with him getting us some options and letting us know. Does anyone have any idea of how much bond amount they want, or are we fine telling staff, work with Mr. Matlos to figure out an amount that's best? Yeah, Steve?
Could I just make one comment? So I think later on our agenda tonight, we have a budget discussion, and we're also going to be hearing from our water engineer and water attorney on some water projects, and there are some updates in our budget tonight. But I think is what have just briefly mentioned to the mayor, is that I think after the first of the year, probably our second Tuesday in February, I'm talking with our water team, that we would have a water work session with the board and our technical water team to reevaluate our 5-year water CIP plan and the schedule for different projects. And I think knowing that we have a potential revenue bond option, it allows us to do financial planning as well as project scheduling of how much and when we need to spend both our cash reserve and/or look at a bond issue, depending on the scope and the cost of the projects we try and do in a given year. So I think when we have that kind of water work session, we'll have a clear idea of when we may plug in a bond question or a bond issue for the board to consider. I'd also point out that this next year in our budget, we do have a water cost of service study, which will update, both the billing fees and the service fees based on our budget and our finances as well as our projects. And then we also have a wastewater cost of service study and a master plan update for the wastewater system. So we have a lot of work going on in our proposed budget for next year in our utility systems. So I think when we, knowing that we can pursue conversations with Mr. Matlos about a bonding option, but we'll have more direction, I think, when we have our water work session after the first of the year to talk about our revised, kind of updated schedule on projects.
Following up on that, you had indicated the presidential election year can sometimes throw some of this into flux. How long does it take you to process the bond? And if you were to pick a date in 2020 and say, have stuff done by this date, what would you say?
So it's 60 to 75 days from start to finish. They go. You don't have to have the numbers, just, to get the process started. If, decisions made to move forward and you kind of say, we're going to do this, we just don't know exactly how much. That can start before you have the numbers. We also don't need to have the exact project figured out, as long as you have projects. We might pay for this or this, that's okay. You can figure that out later. I would think you'd want to kind of, if you're going to do this, and this is what the town wants to do, I would aim to get it done before June. I don't see much before then, but we can't do a very good job looking forward. But it could be a international event that causes disruption or something. But you get closer and closer to the election, sometimes things get a little wacky. In 2016, we had a big run up in rates, and then rates came down, and then they went. It was unstable for a while. It ended up being fine, right? But it was unstable for a little while. Uncertainty is not what financial markets like. They like certainty. So as we get through the primaries on the Democratic side, if something happens there, and a candidate that people didn't think was going to be a candidate, or I don't know what's going to happen, but something like that. So I would shoot for earlier in the year rather than later, just because it's sooner and it's easier to predict, probably.
So that sounds like we need to make our work session as soon as possible in January so that we can avoid some of these problems. Any other questions, concerns from anyone? Are we fine with everything Steve and Mr. Matlos have described? Okay, I think you have
Thank you very
direction.
much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is action item C, Charles Abbott and Associates presentation. Mr. Stamey.
So as we've gone through our building code discussion and updating our building codes, over the last couple of years at CML, I've stopped by the vendor's booth and I've had a couple discussions with Charles Abbott, who provides building inspection services to local governments. And so I thought it would be good for us tonight to just have an introduction for them and presentation of what their services are and some representative communities that they do work for. And for the board to consider if we want to go the next direction to look at them for a service agreement for building inspection services.
Thank you for allowing me to come and speak to you folks tonight. Name is Tim Inglis, Regional Director for Charles Abbott Associates. I've got with me Greg Robinson and Mike Thyssen, also with Charles Abbott. Just, in your packet, in your agenda packet, you have about 90 pages or so of information there, and I'll just break that down quickly for you. Starts off with the history of Charles Abbott. Charlie started a company in 1984, providing not just building inspection service, but just community services in Orange County, California. He was an engineer, and he recognized working for a county that he could do things better. He could be more responsive, a little more efficient, and started the company. And many of the initial communities that he started out with are still customers today. Many of them back in the 80s and 90s. The reason we still have them is because of our philosophy that Charlie initiated with partnering with communities through the good times and the bad times. We truly partner with our clients. Some of the events that we do, whether it's a Founders Day parades or recently over here at town of Frederick, I think they call it Miners Day event, a big festival. So we sponsor and also volunteer. Our folks volunteer for those events. But as I said, the company's been around for 35 years. We have some 80 or 90 communities that we work with. Engineering, building inspections, code enforcement, and some environmental work. In Colorado, some of the communities some of the neighbors that you have here, Kingsburg, Frederick, Bennett, Lyons, Wheat Ridge, these are all customers are currently. So in your packet, you can see other references, and you're welcome to call any of them. I believe Steve has spoken to a couple of them, and feel free to call them. We do what we say, and also in your package, you'll see that we provide our communities with our in-house software, free of charge. We also, if your current software, we'll do a conversion and bring it over to our software, and it'll still be the old information will still be available. If you look at the page there, which Trustee Struck has in front of him, you can see to the left bottom corner, that's Kingsburg's homepage, and you'll see the legacy in the very small little icon, legacy permits, and what those are the history. So all of the history will be brought over, so you'll still be able to access anything that's existing or older that may be closed out. So that doesn't go away. We bring it in. We incorporate it in our new software. And through conversations with the town manager, we recognize that one of the advantages that we bring that we would appreciate would be having an on-site building inspector, someone who's local, someone who's here on regular times, that property owners can come in and meet with the building inspector. Someone who also becomes an extension of Steve's staff that can I guess get a better sense of the vision and the desires of the board and what we want for your community, or what you want for your community. And we think that's something that we do that we do in all of our communities, and that's a huge advantage. Instead of just coming through as needed, we're here. And it will be someone that will be assigned to the town of Lockboy. And you will come to know them, and they'll know you, and they'll know what the expectations are. In there, in our proposal to Steve, we're proposing an aggressive percentage. We're looking to grow in Colorado, and some of the communities like Lockboy, we want to come in with an aggressive percentage. It is a percentage of the fees. We believe in letting the developers pay for us, not the taxpayers. And so it's a percentage of the permit fees at a 60-40 percentage, which is somewhat better than what you're currently paying, from what I understand. And I'll open it up to any questions you have for me. And if there's anything else that maybe you'd like for us to do that currently you're not getting right now, that we could adopt as a service.
Trustee Morris?
Thank you. First question, if I could maybe direct it to Mr. Stamey. Would you mind comment for just a minute on what we're doing currently for our building services? And from your perspective as town administrator, the pros and cons of the current arrangement?
We're currently in contract with Safe Built, and you've had presentations from Safe Built. We just most recently went through the 2018 code adoption, and I think they've been with the town for about the last 8 years. Their fees are 80%. So
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Their fees are at 80%. So, this proposal is at 60%. I think one of the things that we have maybe had a couple of concerns in the field is maybe not as aware of things that are going on from a day-to-day when they're driving through town, of seeing things that are maybe being built or work being done without a permit. And I think also the availability of in-the-office meetings with their building staff, having a customer be able to come in and, ask questions about code or inspections, and also working with our building permit tech in terms of, some of the plan reviews that we get, just looking at the site plan, say, does that really work or is that correct? So I think that's, some things that are in addition to services that we would like to have added.
Thank you for that, Mr. Stamey. In some of your literature, it mentions that in the event of a work increase, the possibility of bringing in extra staff, that would be Abbott and Associates?
Charles Evans as a CAA is who we are. So
that would involve bringing in extra staff from your side?
Right. Our idea is to have an inspector that is assigned to Lockboy to handle the day-to-day activity. As activity ramps up based on what we've seen is for future growth for this community, we think there is a chance for additional activity to ramp up, and we would have other inspectors that we would come in and support the one that is assigned to Lockboy, if that makes sense.
So that could potentially involve bringing in extra staff, not just increasing the work hours of whoever's tasked or assigned to Lockboy?
That's correct. I mean, the goal is we do next day inspections. We have a quick turnaround time on our plan reviews, and we do that by ramping up staff and not just.
We have an idea or even a ballpark idea of staff involvement, number of hours per week, or is it too early to even?
I don't have that information. I'll have to defer to maybe Tammy or Steve.
Well, we have the building permit tech who accepts all the permits over the counter, enters all of those, into the current building inspectors or Safe Built software. Then the permits are then we get the comments back, and then the permits issued at the front office. And so it's not to replace our current staff, but it's to supplement our building permit tech activities.
Too early to tell how many hours a week we would anticipate utilizing them in office or on site, I guess?
How much Charles Abbott would be in the office?
Yeah.
I don't know what their exact schedule would be in the office, or if it's,
Oh, it would just depend on the activity.
it's really, right now, we don't have that activity in the office.
But what we can do if, during the downtimes, town manager showed us some workspace that's here at the town hall that, they can occupy. And if a regular set hours, is the desire of the board, then yeah, we'll structure it so there's a standing set hours of maybe 2 hours in the morning or something like that, that people can come in and meet with them. Whatever we're pretty flexible.
Okay. And then final question that I have before I yield is, in addition to the percentage of the fees that you'll retain, are there any other costs or bills for service that go along with the services that you'd provide?
No, sir. For building inspection services, it is a revenue sharing approach. Now, we will, in many of our communities, we will add, not an added cost, but added services with a cost attached to that, such as structural engineering or civil engineering, or things that may crop up that the town may come and approach us about and say, hey, can you do this for us, or can you do that for us? And we'll have those already in place that way we can provide if it's necessary.
Thank you very much for the info.
Trustee Strapp?
So as I understand it, you'll have an on-site or in-town staff person here that'll be available for questions and to do stuff. And that person will be on your payroll at this 60-40 split. That all sound right with everybody? Just checking. So then, you and I could go probably around for hours talking about some of these things, the printouts and stuff that they give, and they're all not consistent with each other, and I assume all that will just be taken care of in the field, but go ahead.
No. So, yeah, and that's what we wanted to approach. We wanted to take a different approach by having one person, so it's so
Exactly.
the consistency is there.
Yeah, so it's like, this page says one thing, and the next page, one leads you to believe that the frost line's at 42 inches, and the next one's gonna be a different dimension altogether. So we would have that consistency. And the houses that you're building here are not, they're connect-the-dot houses, and they're pretty simple, and I imagine it's, within your realm. So the one question I'm gonna ask you, and it's kind of strange, and it's only because I don't really know. But you'll have an engineer that draws up your, or engineers your foundation and your structural and all that. And they pay large fees for liability insurance in case they make a mistake or something. And so what I'm gonna ask you is, if one of your inspectors seems to make a colossal mistake, do you have the liability insurance
We
for
do
that?
carry liability insurance, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Trustee Doherty?
I have a handful. So can you, I guess, walk through a little bit more on kind of the software itself and kind of what the intent is?
I'll do my best. I'm not the software guy. The founder of our company, Charles Abbott, his son Mark Abbott is actually leads the team of software, and Mark will probably be the one to come in and kind of get it set up. But I'll do my best. And Mike here actually uses it. Mike's here behind me, and he uses it on a daily basis in Kingsburg. So yeah, I'll do my best. But if I have to grab Mike, I will.
So can you kind of explain, I guess, what the use of the software is, what the advantages of the software is, what we'd be utilizing it for?
Some of the advantages are real-time reporting. So the inspector's out in the field, he can, on his iPad, he'll be able to result the inspections. And so that the permit tech will be able to see, that the inspection passed or failed, or what the deficiencies were. Some of the other advantages that our communities really like is the reporting. The software will be accessible to the clerical staff here, the town manager, so they can pull up and print off whatever report they want. If they want an annual report, or they want a monthly report, or a weekly report, if they want to present something to the board, they can. It's not something, you're not relying on us to do that. It's going to be something that the town manager will have access to. And it's just a very simple. It was put together. Mark is a building official, so he's done the job. So he knows what the best way to the most efficient use of that software, and how it's the most value, the most bang for your buck. It's very simple. Icons, click and point and click. It's very simple.
Similar, Safebuilt has their own software. I can't remember, what's the name of it, Linda? Do you remember? Merit, yeah, but it just changed to some kind of new name.
So it's specific to Safebuilt right now? Okay, so that might kind of be two parts of the next question then. Is just software compatibility. So, because one thing that, and I'm not saying code software is this way, but I know some softwares make it really difficult for you to get out of using their software once you're in using their software. So that's something that I guess I would be cautious about, is on, hopefully things go really well, and if we go this route, we're sticking with you guys for years and years. But on, like right now, where I'm looking, if things don't go well, how easy is it to get out? Because I think a lot of times software is going to be built to make it really difficult, and that's kind of the way that they trap you into using or keeping them, because you're kind of stuck because of the software.
Yeah, but let me just say, we're a community services company. We're not a software company, and so that's the software is just a kind of an add-on that we do. So we don't make any money off of it. There's no reason for us to tie the town to any kind of a.
So I'm a little curious in the information that you sent us. You don't have a company location in Colorado?
Yes, in Broomfield. We have an office in Broomfield, but as I stated earlier, our inspectors base in the town halls and communities where they serve. It does us no good. It does you no good for them to report to Broomfield every day and then only come here when they're asked to come here. We would prefer. We feel like it's better for you and us if they're more localized.
Another concern that I have is just how new you guys are to the area. So it looks like the longest one that you've been with is Lions since 2016. So, and this is just, I think, something that I think we should think about, is that potentially a group that has been in the area longer is a little bit more familiar with a lot of the design firms that are working in the area, the contractors that are working in the area, and just more familiar with the area in general, to understand that, hey, we've seen this type of thing from this contractor. We need to be looking out for this a little bit more rigorously from this one, because you have that rapport and that experience that I don't know if, having a firm that's relatively new to the area really can bring to the table. Not that if from an overall building standpoint that you guys don't bring that a similar or the same value or even a better value, but experience with local builders and contractors and so forth. I think that's something that we should kind of consider, in my opinion. You said your percentage is 60%? Okay. One thing that and maybe we do have, I don't think we do, that I've been trying to get us to work on is, a really quick page that, I've noticed is other communities call it, I guess, essentially a design criteria. And it's a really quick place for a contractor or an engineer or an architect to go and really quickly, what IBC are we on? What IRC are we on? What's the, what's the wind speed here? So do we have a minimum roof snow load? All of those things that, are really important really early on rather than digging through. I mean, if you have to search for, 2 hours to find out that we're on IBC X, I think we're wasting everybody's time. So that's something that, I think is really important that we have just kind of a one pager. And so if we can get something put together, I think that would be handy. So we talked at the very beginning that we've recently adopted new building codes. What are your opinions on those adoptions?
Most all of our cities are going to the 2018, and so we've been working for a while to get our people trained for that. That I think the biggest impact that we're seeing are the performance codes are going to be the energy codes, and so I think that's just going to be a learning curve. Fortunately, some of the new home building that you have here, the what you called the connect the dots, those are national builders, so I think they've they're ahead of this. They know what's coming down. They know what their the blow door test results need to be. They know what their U values required on the windows, all those kind of things. I think they're already ahead of that. But we tend to do some periodic training and things for our local builders, so that we can makes our job easier if they're educated.
The next question that I have, so we've had a couple of recent's kind of relative, issues with some of the permits that we've allowed. So we've had to issue variances for a couple of things because of, I guess, misses collectively by the town. Were those staff-based or were those based on our code review that missed those? So like one of them that I'm thinking on is the setback with the shed that got missed.
I think part of that goes into site plan review process, and it's a combination of staff and Safe Built not looking at that correctly.
Okay, so having them in-house, do you think that's?
Yes.
Because that's, to me, that's a concern that we've had to, I think over actually the last year, we've had to provide 2 variances because of things that we missed in the review.
I think that would help a lot with our internal education and understanding of reviewing site plans like that.
Okay. And I think, so my last thing is, one area that is not actually enforced really well at all is OSHA regulations. OSHA regulations, I think, are accepted if you're in California. OSHA regulations are generally enforced if something bad happens, not actually proactive and upfront. Do you guys have experience with OSHA enforcement, or are you guys able to take, so you talked about other things, and I know from like just a cut and dry, building inspector and so forth, that's not, OSHA's definitely not in that typical conversation, but is that something that you guys are able to do or willing to do?
I think that, under our building and safety division, I think that we do have some people that have experience with that, but that's normally a state or a federal program. And so I'll have to just kind of yield to Steve as far as if that's something that the city can even enforce. But we can certainly talk about that. That is off the normal service for us because of just the jurisdictional limitations.
I'd definitely be curious, even from a plan review. I mean, if our plans don't go to the state, then the state has no opportunity to actually review that. OSHA requires that all structures have fall protection and facade access with certain guidelines on what that looks like. And, if you guys aren't looking at it and you're the only ones that are really looking at it, who's catching that? Who's actually, so it really is up to the contractor, the owner, and so forth. And so I think that is something important from the town, from my perspective for the town, that, I mean, if it's a regulation, just, to me, it should be enforced very similar to ADA. I mean, you guys go through and you guys look at ADA requirements, right, for, you know, the 5-foot radius, clearances on doors, grab rail, all of those things. And OSHA is really not a whole lot different from how it was passed through Congress than ADA. So I actually think it's a huge lap in where we're at in a building community that honestly there's very little oversight on that. And so even from like a plan check that you are able to recognize that and say, hey, you guys haven't addressed this at all, you guys need to look at it. And maybe that's kind of a first step rather than you guys actually enforcing that it hasn't got built, but you're the only ones really looking at the plans and are the, I guess, the vocal voice, the voice that says, hey, you're missing X, Y, and Z. So if we don't say that, nobody's gonna say that because nobody else is seeing the drawings. So even up front, I personally, I think that would be something that I'd be interested to see if we can add as part of what that looks like. Again, not having you guys go out and actually act as OSHA to make sure that people are tied off the right way or all of those things, because I know that's more of a day-to-day thing versus like a permanent inspection, but even just from a plan review, I think that could be very beneficial. So that's all that I have, just those couple of things.
Yeah, and adding steps, you know, just as you're talking, I'm just thinking about things that we've done in the past where, you know, we have those safety meetings and, you know, bring in if there is an OSHA rep or a Department of Labor rep or whoever that handles that, and maybe the attorney can tell who has the jurisdiction over this. Maybe have them come and hold classes. You know, if you know, I know that it's been a while, but I used to have when I was in construction, I had an OSHA card, and there's certain 40-hour training that you had to have that you'd have to carry that card with you, but make it mandatory that someone on the site have that, you know, OSHA card. So there are steps that you can take that doesn't necessarily cross the line to where you're doing someone else's, you know, you're messing in someone else's jurisdiction.
I get what you're saying, but nobody does that in jurisdiction right now, so.
Okay, that's interesting. We can
Well, I
certainly
mean,
reach out.
so just in general, I mean, I don't think most of the plans, so the buildings that we're building right now that get submitted to the town, I don't think they go anywhere else other than the town, right? So who would be reviewing them from an OSHA standpoint, right? You see, so it's not that there isn't somebody else that has that jurisdiction, but that job's not being performed.
Well, I can't really speak to OSHA enforcement, and I think that's partly because it's not something that any local jurisdiction that I've ever worked with has ever gotten involved in. And I'm sure that's because there's probably some federal preemption on our ability to do that, but I can't really speak to that tonight off the cuff, so we'll have to look at that. But I will tell you that, you know, in 31 years of practicing municipal law, I've never come across a municipality through its building department or anything else that enforces OSHA adopted regulations. And so let's take a look at that before we spend a whole lot of time going down that path. Yeah.
And we enforce ADA, so it seems kind of odd that we don't enforce OSHA. I mean, they're both regulations that came through Congress. So I see your point, though, for sure.
And if I could go back to your point about local providers and being local, our inspectors are local. Our inspectors are Coloradians. You know, they are local folks. Matter of fact, Mike lives over here in Firestone, and you know we have, you know, that they are familiar with this area and they are familiar with things that are specific to Colorado in this region.
Trustee Kennerman?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
May I interrupt these proceedings real quickly? We have a bunch of students here, which is awesome. I think they may be thinking about leaving here soon. Guys, we have a discussion coming up in just a few minutes that might be very interesting for y'all. If I could invite you to stay just a few minutes longer, it's about vaping, so.
Can I get the sign? Wait until we're done with this item and then I'll sign papers. Okay.
Thank you for letting me interrupt. I just didn't want them to all scoot
I
out
thought the same
before.
thing. Trustee Connerman?
If we housed a on-site inspector here, how would they occupy their time? I mean, would they do random inspections like code enforcement? And how would they be involved with building permits?
And just to be clear, we're not just going to plant somebody here for 40 hours. If they have no work, we'll find work for them to do. And it may be, hopefully there's plans that are coming in that need to be reviewed. Hopefully customers are coming in that may need to speak to the inspector. But, they're gonna be out in the field performing the inspections. And if there's any, meetings or ongoing projects that, we don't necessarily have to wait till they call for an inspection. We can go out and meet with them while they're installing the HVAC equipment or while they're installing the roof and look at it during the course of construction.
Who triggers them to do that? I mean, how would they know to go inspect a roof?
If it's got a permit on it, then they'll have a record, a listing of any of the active permits.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking. When we issue a permit, would that permit then go to your person? And that would trigger them to go do the inspection, or how would that work?
So there's a number to call in for anybody that's building to request an inspection. So there's a whole list of inspections that need to be done with each job. The builder calls in and schedules those inspections.
And also this in-house person would do random inspections like code enforcement does now?
No, they are not in the code enforcement for weeds and things like that. They're only in the building stuff coming up out of the ground, building enforcement, building code, building inspection. We still have our code enforcement officer who's responsible for that portion of code enforcement.
Okay, well, I was curious because he did mention something about code enforcement at the beginning, so I'm curious about that.
We have communities that have retained our services for code enforcement. Matter of fact, Kingsburg is one of them. But that has not been discussed for your community.
So that would only be for buildings from the ground up then?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Scott?
This, one of my kind of gripes about the existing people, and it might be something that, if you were to take this position, something you might think about, and it's something that's a real pain in the rump in Boulder County. But to me, a site plan review, especially in existing areas where it's infill, not so much like Silver Peaks or LGI or something like that, but like Old Town, is for that inspector during the site plan review is to go out to the property and actually look at what they plan to do and have the ability to say, well, I'm not sure I think this pink and polka dot house really fits the neighborhood, and make that suggestion. And whether it stops the process or not, I think that's an important part of that site plan review, because it should, coexist with what's around it. Currently, my personal opinion is we have some structures in Old Town that, their subfloor is 5 or 6 feet higher than the people's next door. And there's just no reason for that other than, saving money on excavation. So, but that would be my one point, would be to actually look at the sites and make sure that what they're trying to put there is proper.
Right, that's the personal touch that having someone assigned to Lot Boy would help. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anything else? So are we taking action on this side, or?
Well, I think the action would be if you want to proceed with this at a future meeting, or if you want me to have this back with a formal services agreement or not.
Is there anyone who is opposed to bringing this back for formal action at a later meeting? Obviously, you still reserve the right to vote yes or no in the future, but is anyone so opposed to it that we should not even bring it back? Okay, I think you have your direction. Thank you. Okay, if you need your form signed, bring it up real quick. Go, go, go.
You want to move your vaping discussion?
I was just thinking we might do that.
checks I just saw.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Don't be jealous.
Go back to school and write a report on this, or?
No, they just have us attend.
I already signed like the majority of them before.
Oh, well, that's all right. It's kind of fun.
Vaping, do you?
I don't vape, I don't need it here. I don't
Right outside the doors. It's off the left.
Oh, was it gonna stay in here about it or not?
Yeah. Well, a handful looks like a handful are hanging out for the vaping, so I think we will hop to that. And then we'll come back to Mr. Jeffries. So, Mr. Ron.
We're going to move into vaping. The board asked me to take a look at what the town, the local jurisdiction has authority to do on the issue of vaping. I put a memo in your packet. This is, of course, evolving so quickly. I mean, I think that memo is somewhat outdated already. I mean, Denver, I know, took action recently. It's a constantly evolving area of regulation. I don't know what you want to focus your discussion on, whether you want to focus your discussion on whether or not you think there is a problem, which should be a relatively short discussion because it seems pretty uncontroverted that there is a problem. Or if you want to then talk about what you might want to do as a regulatory measure, if anything at all. What other jurisdictions are doing is a result of legislative action that the General Assembly took in 2019 that really increased the ability of locals to adopt regulations, including, if you were so inclined, raising the age for smoking and vaping to 21, the current age of 18. I outlined those jurisdictions that have already taken action to do that. I do know that there is a bill being proposed in the next legislative session, contents of which I think are not set in stone yet, but I am hearing that 21 may be a statewide regulation. Licensing retailers of both vaping and tobacco products is an area that the local government could determine that they wanted to do something with. Frankly, as of right now, we probably have only the little store up the street that sells tobacco products. I don't believe the dollar store does. Yeah. So, I mean, to put in place a big licensing scheme that only would really affect one business, I'm not sure that that's an efficient approach for a town this size, which has a lot of residential uses in town, but we don't right now have a big commercial base. So age, and then the other one that's discussed often and it has been taken up by certain municipalities in the state is banning flavored products. The idea being that the flavored products entice the youth into starting to vape, and then that slowly erodes into smoking. And so the hope is that by banning flavored products, you would make a dent in the teen vaping problem. You know, on the other side, people would argue, well, adults over the age of 21 enjoy flavored products too, and some vaping products are actually used by adults to stop smoking, right? And then that's one of the goals of the vaping industry. So all those things are in play, and I guess I'm just gonna sit back and let you have that policy conversation about what you want to do, if anything, and we can move forward from there.
I think I'll start with Trustee Jeffrey since she was the motivation to get this on the agenda. So, thoughts?
Thank you, Mayor Lofgren, I appreciate that. You know, for me, still learning how to navigate the waters of being on a town board, what I see time and time again in my research, in my vocation as an educator, is how the products are marketed to kids. I continue to see incidents of students with vaping devices at the middle school. they are not even teenagers yet. Like, I really have a problem with that. And sometimes they get them from their parents, but I've even heard of incidents of kids getting a parent's credit card and ordering things on the internet and having them shipped to a friend's house, and then have the friend, like, it really is detrimental in so many more ways than just using the products. So for me, like, what can we do? Like, who can we contact? Can we make a proclamation or a statement that we can use to put some pressure on the advertisers? That's my big question. Can we partner or do something to support the schools and their approach to try to combat this issue that we're facing, primarily at the secondary level, although there have even been elementary school incidents. And I'm definitely in support of any conversation about raising the age to 21, potentially to make it more difficult for kids to get their hands on them. Although I also know addiction, and we legitimately have kids that are addicted to this. How could we provide supports for cessation programs? Because they're going to do it anyway, even if we change the age. But will it prevent some? If it prevents some, then I think we need to take a very serious look at it. Thank you.
So, I guess what side, so, I mean, you talked about regulation. So is the regulation on the use, or is the regulation on the sales? Or is that up for discussion?
Both, or either. So you can regulate the sales in that you can license retailers, and you can put a 21, for instance, you could put a 21-year age restriction on, then you license retailers, and you go out and you spot check and ensure that they're abiding by that restriction. Anyone at the age of 21. So licensing is sort of a program by which you can enforce those types of regulations. So you can do that. You can ban the sale of flavored if you wanted to. So that affects retailers, obviously. And then you can also look at it from the other side, the age at which people can be in possession of electronic smoking devices, vaping products, and tobacco products to 21.
So I think I'm a little torn on this. I definitely think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. I'm just not really sure how to go about it. I think changing the age, honestly, I don't think is appropriate. Honestly, if 18 is okay to enlist in the military, then 18 should be okay to smoke whatever they want. So changing that to 21, I don't really like that, honestly. And so if we change it on the sales side, well, so that affects one or two in town, and so they go to Brighton to buy instead, which honestly probably where most of them buy it anyway, or online, or, I mean, so I guess from a regulation standpoint, I don't really know that there's a lot we can do. I think if we change the age of possession to 21, again, I don't really like that based on, again, if you're okay to serve in the military at 18, but we don't trust you to make your own choices. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, in my opinion. But on the other side of that is enforcement. Like, what does that look like? I mean, so are we gonna have to increase our police force to start getting into the schools? And I think that then that probably actually counteracts a lot of the work that we've tried to do with our police department to get into the schools, is, you know, just a face in the community. And if we're starting to do sweeps of the schools or so forth to find kids that are underage, I don't think that helps that cause, and I think that's still an important cause. So I guess like I said, I'm really torn, because I don't think there's a lot of regulation that I think is appropriate in this situation. But I also think that it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and how we go about that, I think that is definitely something that we should discuss as a board, but I personally don't know what that looks like in my own head right now.
Trustee
I agree with both comments from trustee Jeffrey and trustee Doherty, and I agree it is a problem. And personal experience with it, my wife used it about 7 years ago to help her quit smoking, and it worked. She did quit smoking. So its original intent worked. But the problem I have to ask Maureen is, what are we limited to as not a home rule city? There isn't a whole lot you can do that goes beyond the state statutes, right?
Well, we have police, we have general police powers, and I'm not sure, I guess that's, and the state specifically in adopting 1076, I think it was, or 1033 this year, included statutory cities along with home rule cities and the ability to increase the age to 21, that kind of thing. So, yeah. I think you have the authority as to do any of those options that I outlined for you in that memo, if you wanted to do that. You know, I don't know which health department agency is over the Loch Buoy. Is it Weld County? So I don't know about the Weld County Health Department, but I know that the Tri-County Health Department down in the southern metro area for sure, they have a lot of policy information on this. And it may be worth reaching out to the Weld County Health Department to see if they want to come in and give you guys a presentation on what they find to be the most effective approach to actually, I think, make a dent in the problem that you recognize. Because you make all really valid points, and this is the yin and the yang of this problem, right? I mean,
And my thought is, I agree with trustee Doherty, if we do get proposed draconian measures, they'll go somewhere else. And then we won't have the ability to control it with our own purvey, which I think could be a problem too. Again, I'm torn at what to do about it.
Chief is over there looking like he has something.
Yeah.
Well, only to respond a little bit to trustee Doherty about the enforcement and the police officers in the schools doing that. So we currently writing tickets like crazy at the high school for this particular issue. I mean, we're just, every time we catch them with it, we're writing tickets. Keensburg was the same as us. They didn't have a ordinance to address it, so they had to pass a new ordinance there so we could write those tickets in the high school. Middle school's taking a little bit of a different approach on not just saying, hey, we're going to write tickets, but we're going to do some education, and then maybe the second or third time we write the tickets, right? And I think I like that better. I think that's a better approach than what's going on at the high school, but they have a different administration and they're doing it differently. They're kind of a hammer down kind of administration, and they want everybody to be held accountable right now for everything they do. As far as the enforcement, like with change the age to 21, that affects us by one store right now. I guess that's not that big of a deal. But the only way we're really going to enforce that is if we run like a sting and we try to put an informant in there who's under 21 to go purchase this. I don't know. I don't see us doing a lot of that type of thing. So because that can happen right now even. We can do that with a 16-year-old and see if they're going to sell them cigarettes or whatever. But I think right now we don't have a ordinance that addresses vaping at all. So maybe that's where we need to include that in our tobacco ordinance, right, with people under the age of 18. I think that would be a start to be able to, because we can write tickets for tobacco possession, but we can't write tickets for vaping possession in the town of Loch Buoy right now.
Trustee Morris?
Yeah, thank you. I think we should do all that we can for the safety and the health and the welfare and well-being of our citizens in general and our youth in particular. We can reference all of the bullet points about the CDC declaring it an epidemic, about all the health consequences. Speaking as a father, I have a teenager in high school who has been involved with this, and as a result of the school's policy, which I wholeheartedly support and endorse, he had to forfeit 20% of his football season for possession. He's also suffering from vape lung or whatever we call it. It is affecting his, as well as thousands of youth across the country and in our own hometown, negatively and long-term and even possibly permanent consequences to it. I think it's our responsibility and I think it's our duty to do everything we can to protect. I think increasing the age that they can buy or purchase it to 21 is appropriate on account of the negative deleterious health effects. It's not a harmless substance or product. It causes significant damage. I think we should do what we can to provide as stiff of penalties or consequences for those who are providing it to the underage users. The comment's been made that they're going to acquire it wherever they will, whether from Brighton or Lochbuie or from their friend or whatever. They're going to acquire it. I don't think that excuses us from imposing regulations that are necessary and appropriate. I don't know off the top of my head what a citation does for them or what a ticket does for possessing or for using or something, but I would advocate that increase the penalties, increase the consequences. And there are vultures out there who are preying on our youth that are going around peddling this stuff and other harmful substances, not just in the schools, but in parks and neighborhoods. And if we could enact ordinances or laws that give some teeth to the police to protect our youth and restrict it, I think is an option we could pursue. Make it so that it's illegal to sell, use, consume underage in public areas, in parks, schools, etc. I think I take probably what Mr. Doherty referred to as draconian approach, and I'm okay taking a hardline approach on this. This is bad juju. I think we should look at adding vaping to the whichever statute it was, and forgive me, I lost the page, but give me 1 second if you don't mind. The statute about making it unlawful to furnish to anyone under 18. Vaping is not included in that statutory definition, and I think we should.
Ordinance mean?
Yes. Section 39 and a whole bunch of numbers, whatever that is. I think it would behoove us to include vaping into that.
I think what you're trying to say is right now we don't address vaping particularly. We just talk about tobacco products, and you want to, at a minimum, I think I'm hearing you say, expand that ordinance to also include ESDs or vaping.
Yes, what she said.
Okay.
Thank you, and that is my comment.
Trustee Stratt?
You know, I kind of see this like alcohol or tobacco, 40 years ago or 50 years. It's really the same thing in a lot of ways. I agree with all these bullet points on things we could do. When you mentioned hardline, I would ban it altogether from this town. Just ban the damn thing, entirely. But so, everybody, 21 and older, everybody. If we ban it for all our children here in Lochbuie, that's great, but what's it do for them in Keensburg? We're not making rules for people in Keensburg. The other side of this whole thing is this board is supposed to stay neutral on legislative actions and ideas and stuff to some extent. We don't really take a side, whether, say, for instance, CC, we don't take this side or we don't take that side, but yet here in a really a big thing that's coming up, we're trying to take a stance. So part of me says, well, maybe we should stay neutral for a little bit until we see which way this ball game goes. I don't agree with any of this. I think the biggest part of the vaping is because I think the children can smoke pot or something without it being detected. Can they tell the difference whether it's flavored or menthol or whatever it is, CBD or something? And I think it's a way for the children to get away from it or adults to get away from standing right in front of you doing that. You don't know the difference. So my hard line would be to just say to hell with the whole thing and get rid of it until they do something about it. But I realize that's probably impossible to some extent, but maybe we could be the first in the nation to take that step. So enough senseless talk, so thank you.
Before I turn to trustee Connerman, does the state statute allow us to go that far? No. I was gonna say, okay, and then the other quick follow-up I had to your point, Larry, there's no rule that requires us to stay neutral on state legislative things. That's just kind of been our policy as a board to do that, particularly on things that are divisive like CC. If we have consensus of this board to say something, we can. So, trustee Connerman?
I think for us to say that we don't want to do anything is just burying our heads in the sand. You know, I think we need to do all that we can to combat this epidemic, just like we have others. And I'm real concerned about passing some sort of ordinance about usage on public properties. What are we going to do when we build our library? We're going to let them vape out in the parking lot? We're going to let them vape inside? I mean, we need to take some steps now, or we need to have an additional meeting to discuss this further, because I am definitely opposed to not doing anything. I think there's things we can do. I think we can team up with the school system and see what we can do together as far as that goes. And being a past addictive counselor for the state of Colorado, I can tell you that burying your head in the sand is not going to work. It is not going to help the people that are struggling with this addiction, the same as those with the opioids. And I don't like the argument about being old enough to fight in a war, because we have a hell of a lot more children in this country than we do people fighting in a war. And we need to be concerned about that. So,
If you're not aware of any of the statistics around vaping, please let me know, because I could put you in touch with a couple of very good resources. I equate the use of vape devices in particular as an almost immediate addiction, because the level of nicotine in those devices is significantly higher than most other tobacco-containing products. So the consideration of raising the age to 21, I see your point about people being able to join the military, but we're talking about addictive things. You can't drink alcohol until you're the age of 21 legally. You can't smoke marijuana until you're the age of 21 legally. I believe this should be at that same level because it's so addictive.
Ready?
I guess from a regulation, I actually think if we want to be effective, I don't think regulation is the way to go. Primarily because I don't think regulation is an effective way to keep people from doing things. We have speed limits, right? People still speed. I don't think there's been a law passed in the history of mankind that has kept people from doing things. That's not why we should be passing regulations. I actually think if we want to be effective to do this, we should do more outreach. We should look at other methods that are effective. I like, Maureen, you brought up bringing a team in that has done this research and understands what is effective. We've talked a lot about regulation, but let's bring them in and actually see what's effective. Because honestly, I don't think that 90% of the kids in school are above 18. So how is changing it to 21 doing a whole lot to begin with? It affects what? 2% of the student population, and none of the student population in the town of Lochbuie? Like, so what are we doing? I don't understand how regulation is really. I understand there's a problem and we should do it. I don't think regulation is the way to go about it, because I don't think it'll actually have a huge impact on it. I definitely understand addictive. I would imagine you can probably find a study that shows that cell phones are exceedingly addictive. We don't have any policy on cell phone usage in the town of Lochbuie. I mean, there's tons of things out there that people do. People drink too much. We don't have a policy that says, hey, George, you can't drink more than this. We have a policy that you can't drink more and then drive, because that affects other people. But like, I think going down the line of regulating how people impact themselves, isn't very effective because the people that want to do that are going to find ways to do it anyway. But, so I think if we really want to focus and curb this, we need to find better methods and see what those methods are from what Maureen was saying to help this throughout the schools, and not just in the town of Lochbuie, but throughout the school districts and where we have impact. So that's where I think we should be focusing this. I don't think regulation is going to do anything. I think it make the board feel good, but honestly, I think it has minimal impact.
Should we roll back our tobacco ordinances then?
Which ordinance in particular?
Get rid of them. Why are we limiting who can buy tobacco and when and where?
At 18? Is that what you're saying? Or the age?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the valid question.
Counterman?
I just wanted to point out another problem with this vaping is it's becoming a gateway for people to mix THC in the vaping. So it's more than just a nicotine issue. It's a drug issue. And we need to be aware of that. It's a gateway for younger people to get into other drugs. And that's another danger of this, and another reason why I think we need to take some sort of stance on it. That's all I have.
Trustee Morris?
Yeah, just a quick response to Trustee Doherty, who actually does have some really good points and valid arguments. As usual.
Ouch.
As always. Regulating that's in our wheelhouse. That's what we do. That's how we address things. This body, we can't go to the school and enforce things. We can't go stand outside the store and prevent it, but our role as elected people and policy setters is to kind of steer the ship and regulate things. And having regulations in place and ordinances and whatnot, that provides for consequences for those people who do violate the law. Without ordinances and laws and regulations, we can't enforce anything. So by not doing anything or not adjusting, we could essentially be green lighting furthering of the epidemic. So the enforcement side is not under our umbrella, but it's what we do. It's what we should do. Thanks.
And my thoughts are, there's a lot of good points on both sides of this conversation. But I agree with everything Trustee Morris just said. Regulation is never going to stop every bad thing that happens. I wouldn't have a job if regulation stopped every bad thing that happens. But that doesn't mean we don't regulate. We regulate, maybe not to prevent the person who's trying to use it. We regulate to prevent the person that's trying to sell it. And that's where you start. I mean, if they can sell it to anyone, then people are going to use, and it's going to be easier for them to use. So we have to start somewhere. My kind of thought is, I think Trustee Counterman is dead on. We need to bring this back for another meeting. Maybe bring the Weld County health people here to talk to us at that meeting. But I think as an initial course of action, there seems to be at least a majority consensus to add vaping to our tobacco ordinances so that tobacco and vaping are treated the same. I think we have almost universal consensus on that. And the second thing, Trustee Strock's comments actually made me think about was, if we have a majority consensus of this board, we could write a letter urging our state legislators to support legislation on a state level to regulate this in the upcoming session. So I think those are things we can talk about for formal action at our next meeting. So I will leave the floor open for any further comments now, but I think we will bring this back on the 3rd. Trustee Jeffrey?
Are we able to make a motion tonight to amend our current regulation to include ESDs? And if so, I so move.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's necessary. I've gotten consensus direction from this board, it sounds like, pretty clearly, to bring an ordinance back to include ESDs in our prohibition, but for now to leave the age at 18. And so I can bring that back at the next board meeting. I can't. Back in front of you at the next board meeting, and then work with the health department and their schedule to try to get them here. And frankly, that probably puts us into January because it's already November and we only have one meeting in December. And then the General Assembly will be seated for the next legislative session, and we might have some more information as to what those bills look like, so.
Yeah, I think that makes most sense. Let's bring the ordinance to add vaping to the tobacco ordinance to our next meeting. And then we can talk a little bit more then about what actions in addition to that we want to do, if any, at our next meeting. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. And thank you for the students that hung around to see that thrilling debate on vaping. You are free to go if you would like. You can hang out. It's probably going to be another hour or so, though. Mr. Jeffers?
Mayor Lofgren and trustees, I'm here this evening to ask for approval of an IGA with the city of Fort Lupton for use of the Fulton Ditch Augmentation Station. We had a discussion about this earlier in the year. The agreement is intended to fulfill an obligation of United Water and Sanitation District in the Water Resource Credit Agreement for Loch Bowie Station. This agreement, if adopted, would allow the town to deliver water from the Fulton Ditch back to the river, and then we can use that water for augmentation in the town's current augmentation plan, and that's to help supply water to the subdivision here in town that's supplied by the town's wells. The Fort Lupton Board is going to consider this agreement at its December 2nd meeting. So you guys get a first crack at approving this if you want to do that. The agreement itself also will set the stage for similar agreements, I believe, between the two municipalities for use of the augmentation station to deliver water back in Section 3 of the ditch. Currently, this is the only structure in that part of the ditch, and because of the ditch company's articles or bylaws and regulations, water has to be delivered back to the river in the same section where it was historically used. So the water that was dedicated by United for Loch Bowie Station comes from several different sections of the ditch, I think all 3 sections. This will only take care of a portion of that water, but it's an important first step. We filed an application in Water Court in July to start the process of getting the water rights changed from irrigation to municipal and for use in the augmentation plan. This is one of the augmentation stations that we've identified as potentially using. And so by approving this agreement, it gives us an opportunity to start to put that to use, perhaps in a substitute water supply plan next year, and start to deliver the water and test the methods of doing that and see how well it works for us, which would also help us potentially in the Water Court to obtain that decree. The terms of this agreement are essentially the same as we talked about before, except for, I think, 2 or 3 conditions. Just as a reminder, this agreement was set up by the city of Fort Lupton as a way to pay a portion of the, or pro rata share of the construction cost for this augmentation station as sort of the buy-in price for the agreement. We had talked about trying to get the ability to get a perpetual agreement or a 40-year agreement. Fort Lupton had only proposed a 20-year agreement. I did have those discussions with their attorney. The city was not willing to extend the length of that. So the agreement is still drafted as a 20-year initial term. It can have an automatic renewal for 10-year terms. It can be canceled if there's notice given immediately prior to that, the expiration of the term. Otherwise, it can't be terminated unless both parties agree to it. So it doesn't quite have the amount of certainty I wish it did, but it's still a 20-year agreement. I think that it's worthwhile to pursue this agreement, get this agreement in place. The purchase price, or the buy-in amount, if you will, is $19,200. That price is because you're basically obtaining a half a CFS of capacity in a 50 CFS structure. It's just a 1% interest or right to use that facility. We also structured the agreement so that in addition to that buy-in, the one-time payment, there is a provision here for annual operation and maintenance expenses. That was the other issue that you asked me to discuss with the city, and that is whether or not we could prepay some of that, because this is really driven, this is going to be paid by the developer fees for Lac Bowie Station. There was deposit made that the town is holding to pay for this structure and other structures. And so I thought it was more appropriate, and I think you agreed, that rather than having the town have to pay annually these O&M expenses, we try to prepay that, have that come out of those fees as well. The Water Resource Credit Agreement allows that. So what I've done in here and what this agreement proposes is to essentially prepay about 20 years of that. Now, there are some escalating provisions every 5 years. The fees can go up, so it probably wouldn't cover the whole 20 years, but it would be a good start on covering that so that the citizens here won't have to pay for that. So that amount is $16,000. The total then is $35,200 upon signing this agreement. Again, those funds will come out of a deposit you're holding for Lac Bowie Station. The rest of the agreement is pretty standard. There's some provisions in here for what if there are emergency repairs or major repairs and replacement. The town would be required to pay a portion of that. Again, your percentage is 1%. So it's relatively small even for a large project. So I think that that's acceptable. There's some other just general terms and conditions here that I won't go into. So if you've had a chance to look at this, or if you have any questions, let me know. But I would ask that the board approve this agreement and help the town keep moving forward with its water plan for Lac Bowie Station. Thank you.
Trustee Strott?
So when you take the 19,150 and divide it in half, I came up a little different. I came up, we're giving them an extra $50. I mean, it really doesn't matter too much. Because we were gonna give them, what was it, 19,200 instead of the 38 for the 300. And then then if you take the 660, for 20 years is about 13,000, but you just said that there were some escalating fees that would fall in there also, so. And they're paying that, not us anyway, so.
Right. On both of those points, on the first one, it's just a rounding.
Yeah.
On the second one, we actually tried to factor in some of those increases so that the town would pay less. And if in fact that deposit is more than would be used in 20 years, you'd either get the money back or it would roll over into the next term of the contract and be available for that. So we're trying to do our best to cover all those costs if we can.
I think it's a real good job, so thank you.
Trustee Doherty?
So I have a couple of questions. Are we planning on, so the 0.5 CFS, that's basically 365, right? Like it's everyday capacity?
Not exactly, because the ditch doesn't run 365 days. But yeah, whenever the ditch is running, you have the right to use that. The ditch also goes in sections, which means sometimes it's not running at all, and at other times it is running.
So is it like, are they allowed to use that 0.5 CFS if we're not?
And again, it's not a water right, it's just capacity in the ditch. It's your ability to run a half a CFS of water down back to the river. So yeah, if you're not using it, they can use it. And there are other users on that part of the ditch. It's not an exclusive right to use it. They have 200 shares in the ditch, you have 22. Our company has more. So there are other people who use that, but it's also a 50 CFS capacity. Your interest is going to be 1%.
So I get that it's a small percentage, but I guess if it's not owned by other people to use that volume, then why are they allowed to use that volume, I guess?
Well, it's just a common thing. It's basically a mutual right to use it if somebody else isn't. If you need it, you can use it. If you're not using it, somebody else can use it.
So is there anything in the agreement that keeps us from selling our 0.5 or leasing our .5?
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is, because they're hoping to get other people to buy into the structure. And so originally, it prevented you from selling it, and I did ask them to change that so that this is unlikely. But if you were to sell your water rights to somebody, maybe you wanted to get water rights in a different system, then you could sell that interest to them. But they don't want you to have the right to buy in, turn around and sell that to somebody else that they're trying to sell to.
So what if we're not planning on selling it, we're renting it? It's a temporary, it's a rent.
I don't think you're allowed to do that either. We can look into that, but I think the purpose here is to be able to run the water that you've acquired,
I guess-
get it back to the river.
For sure, but I guess if we have capacity and we're not using it, and we've already paid for it, then I think we should try to get somebody else to use it and pay us.
I do not believe I would be successful in negotiating that with the city.
Well, if it doesn't say that we can't rent, then they sign our agreement, that's our agreement, no? And then the other question is, I guess, what's the advantage on paying them up front? I mean,
The O&M costs?
well,
There's two payments. The first payment is what I call the buy-in payment. The advantage is they won't sign the agreement unless you pay them that amount.
right,
The second payment is the O&M costs. Yes, and to me, the advantage is that by paying it up front out of the developer's deposit, this town doesn't pay any of it. And the customers and the citizens of this town don't pay for that.
okay, and that's fair. But is there a way that we can set that money aside instead? I guess, so one of the things that I've been told is when you prepay things, then they can take that money and make money from it. So they can take interest from it. So why would we not just sit on that, make the payments, but make sure we allocate that? So if there's a way for us to allocate it ourselves, so it's dedicated to that, so it can't be used elsewhere, but we can sit it in a fund that can, even at some minimal interest rate, can maybe help combat some of the interest rate that we're gonna have to pay on top. You said every 5 years or whatnot. I mean, I guess
Let me try to answer that. I don't believe that the Water Resource Credit Agreement allows you to just keep that money for 20 years and not do this with money. You would have to give the money back, I think.
No, I'm saying, so you're saying in the agreement we have to pay it all up front?
What I'm saying is that in the Water Resource Credit Agreement that you have with United for Loch Bowie Station, that we drafted that agreement to require them to give you a deposit that can be used for two things. One is to pay to purchase or lease space in a longer term, an augmentation station. And as part of that is the ability to use those funds to pay the O&M costs. And I don't think you can just hold that money for 20 years to pay the O&M costs. Now, I can look at that again to see if that's the case, but my feeling was it's the developer's money. It'd be better, and if you kept this money from the developer, I don't believe that you can earn any money off of that. It's the developer's money. So what I tried to do was get that money out of the deposit, and we have 3 years to buy these or enter into these leases, and then the money goes back. So the way I interpreted that is we take the developer's money for the buy-in, we take the developer's money for the O&M costs, we make those payments, we check the box, we tell the developer we've spent that money, and we don't want to give it back after 3 years.
That makes sense. I can see that for sure. That's all I have.
Trustee Morris?
I withdraw my marker. My question was just answered.
On for action, so do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve an intergovernmental agreement for the use of the Fulton Ditch Augmentation Station.
Second, roll call, please.
Trustee Morris.
Yes.
Mayor Lofgren.
Yes.
Trustee Counterman. Trustee Ott. Trustee Doherty. Trustee Strock.
Yes.
Trustee Jeffrey.
Carries 7-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll report back to Steve after Fort Lupton's December meeting to let you know whether they also have approved it. Thank you.
Next item is discussion item B, the budget update. Mr. Stamen.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a quick updates on the proposed 2020 budget. You should have on your table in front of you a draft budget message dated November 19th, and also then attached to that is a draft budget with a date of November 19th at the top. And you also have a handout from our water attorney and water engineer regarding some water projects. So I primarily want to talk about the water piece of the budget tonight. But I would note that in the budget, one of the changes that I have made through the budget is I've added some training dollars to participate in the Employers Council training and educational opportunities. So we'll see that ongoing throughout next year. But if you go to page 2 of the budget message memo, and where it's highlighted water and wastewater enterprise funds, and I would like to just highlight a couple things. So the fourth bullet point down, and this was included previously, but just to note again, the water cost of service study is included in this budget. We have added a purchase of water rights in the amount of $250,000. We've added construct a deep water well, and the working number there is about $580,000. We've added an amount for engineering costs for the final water tank design, and I've also added an amount in here for the water tank site acquisition. That's the next bullet, the land acquisition for the water tank site. So the bullet point, engineering costs for the water tank final design and Lake Henry Phase 2 engineering design. So those kind of engineering costs are included. And the water CIP then, if you go down to the next section, so the major projects are listed there. The first change is I have right now left a blank on the Silver Peaks new elevated water. So I will just add in the design cost, because I think the construction costs would actually occur in 2021. And I've included the engineering costs under the engineering services. And I've added a water tank site acquisition, which Silver Peaks, their agreement has, they will provide the site, but there was an amount set for the land acquisition for that site. I think it was $35,000 an acre, but I think there was an escalator in there. But I'll double check that because we will have a fee for that. We have included the smart water meter program and installation. And I think right now, if you just maybe circle the initiate Lake Henry construction, where there's a $1 million there. So I have an idea that I want to work with as we get to the bottom of this. So I have a purchase of water rights of $250,000, that's included. The construction of the water well. And so I've added a new category here as what I would call a CIP contingency, because I think we have some major projects coming up in the next 2 years. And I want to make sure that we're getting those scheduled and implemented time-wise correctly. And so I think we have several projects. I think we right now realize that we have several projects and we have those in a CIP contingency, which we can pick and choose projects from that contingency. And I think shortly after the first of the year, we have our water work session with our water team, including our engineer and attorney, our water and wastewater plant operator, and our utilities engineer to talk about all those projects and the timing for those, and more detail on the costs and how best to implement those. So that's how I would approach the water budget this year, just because of the magnitude of some of those projects. And I think we need a little more detail on. And I know Steve and Chris have prepared a memo for you as well. It's kind of it's not red highlighted, but it's in this format, which they want to discuss some of their water projects that were reflected in the water rights master plan that was done a few years ago, in addition to the water system side of things. And so I'll have them present and discuss that memorandum.
Before they dive in, Steve, can I just ask, for the 2 rate studies, do we know when we plan to kick those off and how soon or how long we anticipate they'll take?
Shortly after the first of the year, I've had a conversation with Wayne Ramey about some assistance on the RFP and getting that out as soon as we can, right around the first of the year.
I'm just going to do a brief intro, and then Chris is going to go through these particular items just to explain them to you. We didn't mean to hit you with so much detail this evening. Really, there's just a situation in here, I think, where the sort of the raw water rights and the raw water system and the treated water system side, we don't always sync those very well. We don't coordinate those as well as we probably should to help you with your budget and your capital improvement plans. And it caught my attention, I think, when Steve and I were talking with Chris. He asked for budget information from us about Lake Henry construction costs and water rights purchasing and those sorts of things, which I think are all very important projects for you. But at the same time, Chris and I are negotiating with FRICO and other entities for other projects like we just talked about with the Fort Lupton Aug Station, other augmentation stations, some things on this list too about local non-tributary well, important to you, they're not cheap. Purchasing other capacity and other systems that are important for water that you have or new water that you might get. So in those discussions, it sort of forced us to think about these other projects that we talk about more with the staff and less with you. And we got a little nervous that maybe they should be as part of your capital plan at some point. It's up to you to decide if you want to include them and if so, when. And so Chris will explain sort of these projects that we think are important enough to have you consider them and for us to discuss at that upcoming meeting. We really look forward to having that work session with you to explain to you what these are and why we think they're important. But I think I'd like to have Chris just go through this list with you to explain a little bit about these.
Thank you. And I agree that this sets the stage for upcoming discussion in January. Look forward to that. I think that'll be an important discussion about how the town can use its resources to best further some of these water resource projects here. And we hope that we can steer us in the right direction in terms of allocating resources to the most effective assets. As Steve mentioned, we had that discussion with Steve Stamey regarding just possible investment in improvements to Lake Henry and some of those features. And we thought this was an opportunity to just present some of the other projects that can be considered possibly as a higher priority than, say, Lake Henry improvements or some of these other things. So I just wanted to walk through this brief list and get you thinking about some of these infrastructure and water resource items. And also provide a reminder that, we've got the master plan that we prepared in 2016, which is another guiding document that helps to put some of this in perspective. And, we hope for the opportunity here to update that document within a time frame as well to help further this discussion. First of all, the Burlington bypass structure. The Burlington bypass structure for water that we're delivering from the Bell Mountain wells down the South Platte River ideally would be delivered down the river to the United Diversion Point. Before the water gets there, the Burlington head gate at times sweeps the river, meaning that it totally dries up and takes all the water in the river. And there's a need to essentially for the Burlington ditch to divert that water and dump part of it back to the river so that we can pick it up down below. That type of operation, we've somewhat worked with FRICO and the Burlington Ditch Company to work around that in the past, and I believe they've now got the infrastructure in place to enable that bypass, but they expect users of that structure to pony up the money to take advantage of that type of functionality. We're estimating the cost based on the water that we could deliver down from Bell Mountain Ranch to be on the order of $71,000. I put this investment in the category of things that we just need to do in order to operate our existing plan. It's an eventuality in terms of when we're going to need that to be in place. Arguably, we need it in place now. A new Laramie Fox Hills well in town is an investment that we can make to effectively utilize existing water resources that the town already has locally, and that we in some ways rely upon as an augmentation source, even though that we don't have a way to get it out of the ground. But by investing in a new well, we can, one, put that water resources that we already own to use, and it could generate some additional credits that small scale developers or commercial properties can help to fund in order to provide some water resource credit certificates. We'll come back to this in some of the discussion about actual water rights, but this would be one way to make some wet water usable for small scale users. There's uncertainty in terms of how much a Laramie Fox Hills well will yield, which is one of the reasons that we encourage the town to go ahead and proceed with that investment, because then that'll provide important planning information for us moving forward. Based on the assumption that the well might operate for half of the year, if the rates range from, say, 15 gallons per minute up to 50 or hopefully more, then the yield of a well of that nature, could yield relatively little amounts on the order of 15 acre feet if the yield was low. But our hope would be that it would be much higher than that, say 50 acre feet or perhaps 100. And that's just a bit of an unknown, and one of the reasons to proceed with drilling a well so that we know what sort of potential we have there. I've presented two cost ranges here for a municipal style construction. That structure is going to be pretty expensive, basically $500,000 by the time you get it done. There is an alternative, though, to drill it with a more of a residential type standard construction, which cuts that cost more or less in half, down to roughly $240,000. So quite a swing in potential cost differences, but part of those considerations there is going to be casing size, materials, the type of drilling method. Our expectation is that by using a municipal contractor, you're going to get a higher yield and more longevity, better water quality, but that comes at a cost, and I think it is appropriate for the town to consider a lower cost alternative, particularly with respect to the informational elements that it could provide. I'll pause there. Any questions on those three alternatives? Those two. Bar Lake Storage Agreement. Yes, I'm sorry.
I just was gonna ask, like, if we were looking at putting in a new well, like you talk about the cost differential for municipal and residential, like what is the lifespan for each of those comparable? Is the upkeep comparable? Like,
we use 40 years as an expected well life for municipal style construction. And we would adjust that downward for a lesser standard. So, I mean, call it 30 to 50 years municipal, and maybe it's more, 20 to 40 years for residential style construction. Comes down to materials. It's just, constructed with a little bit more sophistication and that sort of thing.
Thanks.
Steve Jeffers and I are discussion with FRICO about moving storage between different buckets in Bar Lake and United Reservoir. We've talked to you about this before. We have this here as a priority that may require some investment, but our hope is that as we work through this process with FRICO, that it's essentially, next to nothing cost to the town, other than formalizing costs that may come to fruition associated with electrical pumping and possible book over fees in some situations. But we wanted to provide it as a reminder of something that we're working through that may have some capital cost. But again, hopefully those costs will be relatively minimal. The big ticket item would be water rights acquisitions. And this one's a little bit difficult to assign an cost estimate to for you, because it all depends on what you want to accomplish. Do you want to go big and acquire water rights that would be sufficient to provide for the next subdivision? If so, that's going to be a high ticket item, and something that ultimately would be the expense of a developer, but it could be enabling for growth in the town if you had some water queued up and ready to go. And that could occur either on a large scale or a relatively smaller scale. And a reminder that we should be thinking about ultimately replacing the Bell Mountain water resource. That is a finite water resource on its own. And so some of the fees that we've got built are essentially intended for that purpose. But the number that Steve Stamey mentioned of $250,000 queued up in here would be enough to acquire a relatively modest number of taps that could be provided for further down the road. Hopefully more than 25 SFEs, but we're talking about a small handful to potentially enable some future commercial development perhaps, and to help kickstart some future development, and arguably to provide for some of the replacement of this other water. Something we would very much advocate for. We get a user such as these 7-Elevens coming in, and we have to scramble a bit to find some of these water resource solutions for some of these small users, and I think it would be quite helpful to have some water queued up to help with some of these smaller users. One of the things that we did is we went back and looked at the water projections from our master plan, and getting into the not too distant future, 2021, our existing augmentation supplies could effectively be exhausted based on the growth that we've seen. So that's something we definitely need to keep in mind. But projecting out into the future, if growth continues at the same rate that we're moving, then that we could be in the need of some relatively aggressive water rights acquisitions. Keeping in mind the fact that we're going to have development moving forward at the same time, and hopefully the developers are going to be bringing water to the town to help fund that. So ultimately, I don't think that some of those expenditures are going to be a town expenditure, but they're significant assets that could be moving and coming into the town's possession. There are real advantages to the town helping to front or fund or enable some of those acquisitions here. One of the opportunities that I potentially see as we work with FRICO for the annexation of their property, they've suggested some of the 8490 water to serve their property. And that's one that I see if we could negotiate with FRICO to provide some additional capacity of that type of water resource. That's one that we can just take and plug into our system. It would be, it may be a bit expensive to acquire, but once we get our hands on it, it would be a very enabling resource for the town. And that's just an example of one that we could keep chasing. Lake Henry, we're glad to see the momentum and movement on that and the interest on behalf of the town for that improvement. We definitely support that, but please do keep in mind that Lake Henry is a storage vessel. It doesn't necessarily bring a new water resource to the town. It could be an important part of the infrastructure. It's local and that has its advantages. And we would definitely like to see the town end up with that asset. But it needs to be part of an overall water resource strategy, and we would suggest that some of these other items may come as a higher priority than the Lake Henry improvements for the town's benefit. You know, we acknowledge that we've got an obligation there to FRICO that we need to meet, but I want to provide a reminder of some of these other projects that should be considered as well. More discussion to come here in January. I think we can be prepared for more in-depth conversation with you, and we look forward to that. But wanted to just mention these items to kind of plant the seed for future discussion. Steve, do you have anything to add?
Just two points of clarification. One is on the drilling of a Laramie Fox Hills well. Is there a point where in the drilling process you can test the aquifer without doing a full completion of the well before you decide how to complete it? Or do you have to make those decisions sort of ahead of time?
There's some alternatives that can be considered there, but by the time you get down to the aquifer, I mean, you've got a lot of fixed costs that you've already invested in there, and you might as well proceed with construction. You're probably 60% invested at that point. You might as well do it. Okay. The Fox Hills is fairly consistent, so we wouldn't expect there to be a lot of surprises that we see in the borehole. And the well construction regulations have tightened up a bit so that we're going to not have a lot of flexibility about how we can complete that well anyway.
Okay. So, and then on the water rights acquisition, I think there's Chris made a point that part of it is you can buy a little bit of water. You want to buy enough that makes sense to take to water court because it's expensive to go to water court. But you can buy a small amount that you're using in part to replace the Bell Mountain supply and the local non-tributary supply with a renewable source, but it also may give you an opportunity to have some extra ability to just deal with that one store, that one builder who comes in and says, boy, I'd really like to build this as fast as I can. How do I get water? And you say, well, we've got extra water. You pay us cash. We sell you a certificate. And also along those lines is that you're getting fees from the Silver Peak certificates and the WADA certificates, which were intended to replace those water supplies. Those funds are not nearly enough to replace those supplies because those agreements were set 20 years ago. Those prices were fixed. They had no escalators. Water prices shot through the roof. But there's money there that you can use to replace some portion of those supplies. And really, I think that you need to be setting policies or goals in the future as to how much do you think is appropriate to replace? Is it 50%, 40%, 60%? It's up to you. And so I hope that we can start having those discussions in the work session so that you can think about that and over time tell us what you think you should be doing and then set goals. Is it 1 to 10 years? How much water do you want to be acquiring? Because this is not water that's going to be brought in by developers. It's water the town is going to need to purchase. Now you can go in with developers when they're doing it, but really you're going to have to replace that supply to some level at some point. So, thanks.
Good. Finally, some good news. We got a note from the water commissioner today. We've got Free River starting tomorrow morning, so we will be diverting at 8 a.m. to storage, and that's good news. Our current 400 acre-feet of storage has 230 acre-feet in there now, so we really hope to boost that number now as we move into this portion of the winter.
Other comments for Steve or Chris? Mr. Strzok?
So as much as I've, been an advocate of doing something with Lake Henry for years and years and years, by rebuilding part of that for FRICO, that's a great gesture for them, and I'm sure they're just tickled to death with that. And while we're out there patting them on the back, we're going to expand the thing because it makes more sense and all that. But with that all being said, I'm kind of wondering if we shouldn't just, pull back a little on the reins on Lake Henry. And part of my reason for that is if we're going to go out and borrow a bunch of money, if I was a citizen, I would say, okay, I'm going to pay more taxes or more money every year because of that big water tower over there. But if I'm a citizen and someone says, yeah, and half of this new increase is Lake Henry, which I don't know where it is. We're not gonna let people go out there for anything, especially if it's storage. So it kind of makes it from a citizen's point of view, what am I spending millions and millions of dollars on this right now for, when we have these other things, so.
Well, in terms of Lake Henry, you own the property.
Right.
And so you can let people go out there if you want to. It's not drinking water.
No, I know that,
So you don't
okay.
need to keep people out of there to, keep the supply clean if that's what you're concerned about.
Recreation.
If you want to build a park out there and have that as an amenity and have a lake there, there's that value in doing it. I can talk to you in another setting about the contracts and things related to building Henry, how that might be funded. I don't want to do that in this meeting.
For sure.
But I do think that there's still the ability to use that. Whether the citizens will see the value, I don't know.
Yeah, so I was just kind of wondering if it was the right timing, I think, more than anything, so.
I just have to ask a follow-up. Is the same Larry Strock that I've served on this board with for 8 years, in the same night backing off of Lake Henry and suggesting a water rate increase? Because I heard both those things today.
Who? Well, I don't know, it's something to think about, Sometimes you have to.
Some smelling salts.
I had to get you back for those no trespassing signs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for your.
I have one other. So you said the water fees aren't enough anymore to amount to anything. Is there any way we can change
Well-
those or no?
So there's two water certificates. One is associated with the WADA, and we collect a $500 water resource fee with each of those. The Silver Peaks, it's $1,000 with each Silver Peak certificate. That is a dedicated fund for water resource. Those fees were set by the annexation agreements and the settlement agreement with Weldon Third Associates.
We can't adjust them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So just to follow back up here, so I think if the board's okay with looking at just completing the design for the water tank next year and to moving a CIP contingency fund, we can kind of strategize more on these projects, some of these projects next year. That's what I would recommend for our water budget. And I did have a conversation with Wayne Ramey about our current storage and the booster station and serving Silver Peaks. And I think unless Silver Peaks really takes off, there's really not a need for the water tank unless that is concurrent with additional development beyond the Silver Peaks Plan Area 4. And it would not be wise to have a large water tank with water and not a lot of use out of it. So we'll try and time that better with the occurrence of the development. So that's kind of the strategy we're working at in our budget this year.
Okay with that, the contingency rather than discrete project? I'm seeing nodding heads, sounds good. Next item on the agenda is the meet and greet with Brighton. So we had discussed several weeks or months ago that Brighton had reached out to us about a meet and greet. We all kind of agreed, let's wait till after the election. And then we thought about that a little bit more and we said, let's wait till after the first of the year when their new board is seated. Now I am asking this board if we really want to schedule anything with them at all. At this point, I'm sure you all have seen it on social media and in the news. Their board is a complete disaster right now of infighting, and I don't know if it's something we want to step into or get involved in or be associated with until they have it figured out. So if everyone is okay with it, I think our response to them if they reach out to us again in the near future is going to be, not right now, we're too busy. Is everyone okay with that? Yeah.
Question. It would just be a meet and greet, right? Like a social occasion.
Yeah.
I don't know that I see the problem with doing that.
Have you seen the social interactions
Oh, yes.
them amongst themselves?
Oh, yes, I have.
Interesting to see if they even had a meeting tonight, if they had a quorum. They didn't have a quorum? Too many guys didn't show up. I mean, it's a war.
I am very aware. I know one of the council members outside of public policy stuff. And I'm okay being the lone voice on this. I don't know that I see a problem or any harm in having a social event with them.
We could be role models for
Problem.
them.
Problem is, who we're gonna be-
One at a time, one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. Trustee Counterman?
I was just saying, the problem is who we're gonna be meeting with, whether it's social or not. I'd rather wait till they get things settled.
I see your point. I mean, I thought about that too. It's just social. What's the difference? The problem I see is I see that quickly being sucked into, well, he's talking to him and not him and her and all that. And I just don't know that we want to put ourselves in the position of looking like we're taking sides, depending on who decides to show up from their side or not show up from their side. I just.
Right.
We can start talking to them about annexation, right?
That's what I think.
Maybe we
Well,
should find out what they're gonna have for dinner.
It wouldn't be a forum or a venue to discuss any policy or any municipal issues, right? It would, I mean, if we did, it'd have to be open meetings stuff.
We would notice it. There's gonna be all of us there anyway. And every time we've had one of these, they inextricably move into some kind of discussion of at least some policy. Usually not anything too serious, but we talked about County Road 2 at the last one. We've talked about that kind of stuff before.
Maybe they could host us at a bowling event or something.
Yeah.
Too noisy to discuss
You have
politics.
large weapons.
Well, like I said, I'm okay being the only voice in favor, but I wouldn't be opposed to it.
Anyone else have strong opinions? Mr. Strong?
I'm in favor of the meet and greet also, and whether it's just to, put a burr under their saddle or something, but that, and then I kind of wonder about the sewer board, so what are we gonna do about them?
I mean, that's a formal action. If we need to take formal action, we can have a formal meeting.
We don't really do anything with them at this time.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if we have to have a sewer board meeting, we'll have a sewer board meeting. That's a less discretionary.
Sure. Same people.
Let's take a vote on it and get it over
That's
with.
it. I'm looking for who's in favor of us trying to get something scheduled with them. I see 2 hands and a half a hand. So I think for now we'll hold off. I mean, I'm totally open to reconsidering this after we see what happens when their new board gets seated. Maybe things will smooth out, but for now, let's hold off. And maybe in the meantime, we reach out to Hudson or Fort Lupton or someone we haven't had a meet and greet with in a while and try that out. Okay, next item on the agenda is staff comments. Chief McCoy.
Not anything crazy to report at all, just other than my report. The Halloween event was freezing, right? So we don't have any heat where we usually do the haunted house, so we canceled the haunted house portion, but we did open this lobby up and we had the trick-or-treating and things. So we had a pretty decent turnout. We had some people disappointed we didn't have a free haunted house for them because they really like that. But hopefully next year we can get back to that. But the weather wasn't conducive for that this year, but we still had an event and it was pretty well attended. A couple days ago, Officer Hernandez resigned a couple weeks ago. He had worked for us for a minute and then he resigned and then we came back and now I guess this just isn't his thing. So that's good. If this isn't his thing, then he should do something else. So, and then Officer Hart just resigned. He's looking to go somewhere else. So he just resigned last week. So we're in the process of replacing those guys. But it is what happens with medium to small size departments. It's a kind of training ground. So that's what happens.
Does that mean you don't need a new car in the budget next year?
No, we're going to replace those guys. Or 2. Who said 2 last year? Somebody was trying to give me an extra one. Yeah. Other than that, everything's going pretty well. We're moving along pretty good. So, do you have any other questions or any questions at all?
Questions or comments for Chief?
Oh, and I hope Lieutenant Ramirez filled in fine last month
He
when I
did.
was hanging on the beach.
His update was much shorter than yours.
Yeah, it was much shorter than mine? Wow, that's pretty short.
Add more hair.
Yeah, he's got more hair. He's a little younger than me. He's a lot taller. He's a better looking dude than me. I can't help it.
So any questions or comments for Chief? Thank you for the update. Next is Public Works, Mr. Bebeck.
Okay, thanks. Unlike the police department, we are full staff. And, it's job security. Good crew, and I'm happy to report for now, we're full staff, 3 guys plus myself, so four guys running the department. Everything pretty much on schedule. Plowing, we actually might do some plowing tomorrow night. We'll see how it goes. We're ready for all that stuff. We do have our little Polaris side-by-side. I don't know if you saw it. That thing is awesome. We have a little plow that mounts up on the front of it. Much safer than the little ATV we used to run. Thing's got an enclosed cab. It's the bomb. And actually, if the sidewalks on County Road 2 were completed, we'd be plowing that, but not just yet. But that was the intention of purchasing that unit. It's for the sidewalks, the new sidewalk on 37, the new sidewalks going towards Silver Peaks, the school sidewalks on Bonanza. Actually, looking into getting a small sand unit for that particular machine, just to salt and sand sidewalks along the school. That's kind of the day-to-day stuff. I did summarize. There's a lot of things are happening actually. One thing I can say is I'm glad I'm here because I'm getting this exposure to all these projects that is pretty unique. I got to say that. And I've worked for large agencies, and it's just the opportunity is here. So I did summarize some of these projects. Obviously, everybody knows about County Road 2, and I've yielded a lot of constructive criticism from the public about it. And so trying to stay on top of that, respond to everybody. I'm not on Nextdoor, but I know there's quite a bit of discussion on that website about it. So you've seen all the activities. Steve and I, we're staying in touch with the contractor, with Inertia, with the guys out there to push as hard as we can. I mean, the initial, those guys came in last meeting and they discussed potentially about splitting the project up once again, and obviously not all the components of the project will be completed this fall. But one thing that we just found out, they are going to push to rip the center of that road next week and put one lift of asphalt through it. That's going to be great. So hopefully the weather holds up. Obviously we have some bad weather coming in, but it's going to be touch and go through fall and winter actually. Roundabout out on the street, put the schedule in for you for your review. We actually have a pre-bid meeting tomorrow. I glanced at the plan holder list, or how many companies downloaded the papers. So far, it's about 60 companies that actually looked at that project. So hopefully, about half actually downloaded all the papers. So that's good. I did take out the landscaping out of these small medians. Flexibility to add those things in there, but I think between Steve and I and he's just kind of brainstorming, let's just take it out, keep the cost low going into it. We'll see where the money is at when it comes in, what the budget is, but I think the intention is to not landscape those. Plus, they're, as small as they are, it would be a pain in the butt to maintain them anyways, trying to walk in there and park a vehicle in there. But so I think that's a good direction to go, not to landscape those little vacant strips.
Say not landscape, you mean just no greenscape? It's still gonna be rocks or concrete or, yeah, okay.
Landscape or concreted, instead of having shrubbery grown out of course, the center will be fully landscaped like planned. 20-inch transmission line, another project, looking forward to completing that by the 24th. That's the time frame everybody knows about. That's the time frame given from FRICO to cross the ditch. They're out there right now. I'm sure you've seen them. They're about to cross it. Have the casing placed across the ditch. FRICO is scheduled to be out there Friday or Saturday to observe the backfill, because the backfill has to meet a certain requirement of bentonite and all that. So they'll be out there Friday, hopefully backfilling that. And hopefully sometime after that, we'll be pressure testing the entire thing. That thing can finally come on board. looking forward to that. The other project that is, obviously, this is approved by the board, as you remember, is the Cureton gas line through Altamira. So I just, as a reminder, I put the layout of the pipe, the proposed pipe. They are pursuing this, and within a few weeks here, they requested a right-of-way permit. I'm working with our engineers to review that request. We don't have actually the plans for that project yet. This is just a rough alignment of the pipe. All that piping is meant to be installed within the right-of-way through the future development. So I sent them all the plats, they looked at it, we are still discussing it. It hasn't been finalized. We haven't issued the right-of-way permit, but that's the plan for that company to get going here within next month. County Road 37 streetscape, that's been installed 2 years. We just had a walk, the warranty walk. Everything held up well, aside a couple of small issues there, a couple of stones that need to be replaced. Pavement, I've been listening to the board's input on pavement, Berkshire and all the different places, farms, and so I'm in tune to that. Keep that in mind. So, but I haven't formalized or finalized the pavement. I do want to address, I mentioned the mill and overlay on 37. We will be back in Berkshire to finish up the slurry that for some reason wasn't done back in 16. We'll finish that up. There's going to be a lot of patching going on with all the cracks you're seeing in Berkshire. There's pretty severe cracks in the farms that slurry seal is just not going to fix. There's going to be a lot of patches through those subdivisions to address those cracks. And last but not least is Excel. This is a heads up because this won't really happen until next year sometime, February, March. Excel wants to upsize a gas line that along 37, starting at 4 down to 2. Part of that is to supply volume to center and station. And I don't know if you remember the sleeves that were placed on the County Road 2. Some of those sleeves are actually to serve that larger pipe. But they just essentially organized a pre-con. Yeah, that's the first time I heard about it. I intended a pre-con, but all that will be bored. I guess that's the intention, is to bore 500 feet a day or so along 37, partially closing 37, just to accommodate their rigs. That's the plan right now. So I put that in there just so you can see as heads up. And the red lines aren't the gas lines. The red lines are the right-of-way. And I couldn't blow up the notes, but it's essentially just running a line, a larger line, and upsizing some of these Ts that go into these neighborhoods, individual neighborhoods along the way as well.
So they won't have to tear up any of the road?
No, they won't, no. At least not, that's what I heard.
Too bad, I was hoping we'd get a free
I know.
road upgrade out of it.
Widening,
Yeah.
37 widening. If you have any questions, please.
Any questions or comments
So I've had a few people complaining about the Spear Canal where they're working until 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, and it's the noise and it's the lights and stuff. So I will avoid those people until after the 24th. Then I also wondered, have we reached an agreement with Cureton about that pipeline yet? We have. Okay, all right. All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you for your update and for all your work on County Road 2. I know you're probably hearing more citizen complaints than any of us are, so.
Okay, one more, if I may. I did put this up because Trustee Connerman asked about, well, not only, it's not why I printed it, but he did ask about transitioning of pavement, you know, between the roundabout and the County Road 2, so these are purple areas kind of indicate what they're doing today. As a matter of fact, they're adding asphalt tapers. This is where the roundabout's going to go. So they're adding transition tapers of sections of asphalt essentially, just to connect 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And same thing, Mrs. Homestead, we're adding a taper, asphalt taper here just to accommodate a transition into Doseful Lane. This is all temporary asphalt that's going to be placed on just compacted native soil, but it will come out eventually. But that's the plan for now until this gets built, that gets waiting. Thank you.
Jamie?
Hello. So you guys have got my report. You see the flows up a little bit from last year. The master plan couldn't be coming at a more timely part of our life here because you can see we're at 70% of flow. We actually had a hook on there's 4 basins down there. We've been running 2 for a long time. We put a 3rd one on just due to the flow and loading increases to be able to meet permit. But other than that, everything's running good. We're getting our money's worth out of that fan press. We've been, Veris has been hauling a load out about once every other, it's actually about every 4 days. So it's running great. I'm so glad we got it because we don't have that big truck in there tearing up the place, and we just got 1 truck coming in and going out. The water plant, sorry, my staff made a mistake on the amount of flow for this last month in October. It wasn't 35 million, it was 15. And that goes back to some of the talk that Steve was saying about storage. As you can see at 477,000, we have 750,000 gallons of storage. So you have 2 days of storage. That's more than enough to get you by. If you had a fire, you have to provide 180,000 gallons because they require you to provide 1,200 gallons a minute at 150 minutes, 160 minutes. So you got plenty of capacity for now. But the more houses we build, we better keep our eye on that. As far as our capital projects, we met last week with an individual that's going to be installing the blending valves. They'll be out the first week of December on the RO. That's the 2 blending valves that can control the total dissolved solids. They'll be out the first week of December. We did got the sink in. We just haven't installed it yet. And I see in the wastewater plant, we did have a meet out there on October 31st with the SCADA guy. So you're going to like this. When you asked about databases and software, we're going to be using a software that's called Ignition that doesn't require an annual fee to keep on it. It's an open structure software so that no matter who can come in and work on it, but more importantly, you just pay the one-time fee and that's it. We got our UV system yesterday afternoon. Thanks for your help for getting it unloaded. We met out there last week. We're going to start tearing it out the old one out next week. We'll use chlorine and sodium bisulfite for disinfection and dechlorination. So that way we don't have to jackhammer out half the floor to put in extra conduit. So that'll reduce some of the costs on the install. We will start on it on the 2nd of December, and it'll probably take us about a week to finish it. So all of us are really looking forward to that. Believe it or not, I can't believe how many bugs. They're midges. They look like mosquitoes, but if you look up, they don't have a poker. They have like a little paw. But I'll tell you what, when you open that door, they're overwhelming. So that's also up for repair. The HVAC, that's why they're in there. One is we keep it dark, but there's just not enough air exchange in there to keep them out. So, any questions?
Said we're at 70% of flow already, and that's before Brighton opens the new school across the way. And
correct.
Wow, okay. Any other questions? Thank you for your update.
Welcome.
Mr. Stamey.
I'll be brief, Mayor. It's been a lot of work on budget, a lot of project coordination. I'd point out on the roundabout, the second line, there's a typo. It's not a bud opening, so don't show up. It's a bid opening.
Nobody saw that, Steve.
Okay, so anyway. We're still working on the two pending Silver Peaks developments to get those ready to come to the board. There's some remaining issues we're trying to resolve. So,
Yes? Any questions for Steve? Mr. Counterman?
There's a bullet point under the general fund on that first page. It says there is a positive 2019 year-end balance and a positive projected 2020 year-end balance.
correct.
Can you give a general figure for those two?
You're on the budget message. So if you look under significant elements of the budget, and I will double check this as we move forward, and currently, we have a projected general fund balance of approximately $5.49 million at the end of 2020, with an unrestricted balance of 2.64.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
It's, if you look at the significant, or
Budget packet that was on your desk? It's right at the very top.
that number may have changed a little bit with the last update, but it should be close to that. No, that's right. So if you, then you look at page 5 of the actual budget handout. Very bottom line of that gives you a projected unrestricted cash ending balance.
So that's piggy bank money?
Yeah.
No, that's kind of our rainy day money.
Okay, same thing, I guess, yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Stamey? Okay, next item is Mayor Trustee comments. I don't know where we started recently. Trustee Ott. Trustee Doherty. Trustee Jeffrey.
I give my apologies, but I'm not going to be able to attend the library meeting tomorrow at 5. If any of you would like to go, it's sure to be an interesting time.
Trustee Strock.
We talked earlier in the year about a fire impact fee, and we'd also at that time said we would try to bring it back before the end of the year. It's been going on for 2 or 3 years now. I think we probably have more than enough information, or I don't know if we need any more, to make a decision on that. While we're mentioning the fire impact fee, at the same time, I think to some extent that we should maybe review the school contribution fee, as far as raising it also a little bit. Seemed like it was a little low when we were trying to pay for things before. The only other thing I have is the census is coming, and I don't know, there was some money that was available from DRCOG, which actually it wasn't just in their area, it was available for anybody. But DOLA also has some things too that are available to help out with that census. And you know, it's kind of funny because there's going to be all kinds of publicity on TV telling you about the people that are scamming. You know, the people, they're going to come to your door and ask for $15 to fill out the form, or they're going to ask for your social security number or something like that. But at the same time, when we get to that point that these people have not filled out their census and stuff, we're the ones that have to go to their front door and convince them that we're not there to scam them. So I see that as somewhat of a problem, getting them to even just open their door, you know, at that point. But anyway, that's all, so.
Trustee Morris.
Yeah, on December 6th is the CML Policy Committee meeting. I am unable to attend that, and I've asked our alternate, my friend and colleague, Mr. Counterman here, to look into seeing if he can attend. But that's on the 6th in the morning.
Okay. Trustee Counterman?
I'm finished for the night.
And I just have a couple quick things. First, on the fire impact fee, I mean, we had a pretty extensive discussion on that, and I think the board's consensus was, let's see what Hudson's gonna do, and Hudson hasn't done anything. So I think the result of that was, we're not going to do anything either unless there's some kind of mutual conversation going on here, so. And I'm happy to bring it back up at some point if we hear that there's some action happening, but that isn't happening so far. Second thing I would like to point out, and kind of get the board's head nods on, is maybe bringing to an agenda at some point early next year a discussion of whether to keep our planning commission. We're back at the same place we were 2 years ago when I suggested we have a conversation about keeping that or not, where we don't have enough people to fill it up, and when we do fill it up, the people quit within 6 weeks. So if the board is okay with it, I would at least like to put it on an agenda to have further discussion about whether we should keep our planning commission or eliminate it, and the pros and cons of both options. Is everyone okay with putting that on an agenda?
Yeah, could possibly expand it to include, I think we have an arts and
Yes,
community
yep.
event. Anyway, these auxiliary committees and stuff.
Yeah, that's actually, I think that's a great idea. So maybe in January or February, have a discussion of what to do with these commissions, committees. Library update, Steve, Maureen, and I are still actively working to see what we can do to get a library here in the near-term future. Maureen's been poking our library attorneys, I've been poking our library attorneys. They're trying to make progress. Right now, they're working on conversations with Hudson. I'll keep you guys apprised of what we hear from that. Bring your calendars to the next board meeting. I have added as a discussion item, scheduling our summer events, the Oasis nights, the socials, the community night. So make sure you have your calendars here next meeting so that we can pick some dates that work for a majority of the board. The other thing I added to our next agenda is a short executive session to discuss the outcome of my discussion with Steve regarding his performance review in light of our conversations at the last meeting. So I'll give you some updates on how that went and some takeaways from it. So be ready for that. I think that's all I had. With that, I will entertain a motion. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned at 9:18 PM.